But I think it's worth it. I don't know if this would help us. I had two little alliterative phrases. We can either suffer in silence or we could heal with help. And yeah. But, we got to put ourselves out there, like you said.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Epic Everyday, our weekday podcast for busy, stressed out Christians who don't want to just get through the week and who want to really instead thrive. I'm Liz Frericks, and this is my husband, Evan.
Good morning.
And we're so glad you guys are here with us today on this wonderful Thursday.
Yeah, it's Thursday.
Just have a moment of like, wait, what day? What? Huh?
It's been a long week.
Seriously.
But God's carrying us through.
Tell me about it. Yes. So since it's Thursday, we are talking about being connected. This week we're talking about suffering.
Yeah. Connected to God more than anything, right?
Right.
It's connected to our fellows as well. But I think I tend to focus on the connected to other people part. But suffering can really sever our connection with God. I mean, especially if we start to become resentful about, him not sorting things out and allowing, if he's supposed to be the gatekeeper of suffering and he just keeps letting all this bad stuff into our life.
Right.
We could pull away from that relationship.
Yeah. Suffering really does change you. And depending on your perspective, it can change you one of two ways. Kind of like Pharaoh in the Old Testament in Exodus, where it says that God hardened his heart. And some of the great commentaries that I've read on it have talked about how Pharaoh's heart, like everybody's heart, can be one of two things. We can either have a heart that's like wax, and so when we go through difficult things, our hearts get softer towards God.
Yeah.
Or we can have a heart like pottery, and so when we go through difficult things, it gets harder towards God.
Yeah. I wonder if, because those are biblical analogies, right? Or like stone, a heart of stone or a heart of flesh.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But I just read the Psalm where it's the one that starts out, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's in the 20s, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what it is?
22, right?
Anyway, some people think Jesus quoted that whole thing from the cross.
Yeah.
But in there it says, my heart is like wax and it melts away from me or something. It's really powerful, and he's getting ready to die. But his heart was always, he's the ultimate example for us. And
right.
He was the suffering servant. He was man of constant sorrows. We can try to be like him.
Yeah, because we can either choose to let suffering make us hard and isolated and miserable, or we can let suffering make us softer and closer to God and more connected both with God and with other people. Suffering is such a great connector. It's also a great isolator. I know for myself, as someone with a chronic illness, I haven't been able to attend church for
it's been
3
a while.
years now, some insane amount of time.
Consistently,
right. I get to go every so often, but I haven't been able to go every week, and I really miss it. But it does mean that there are way less people in my life than there used to be. Yeah. And it's hard. It's hard finding time to connect to people. Well, for me, it's mostly hard finding people that have time to connect.
Yeah.
And it's hard too because, if somebody doesn't understand what you're going through, when you're like, oh yeah, I think as humans, we have a tendency, we're so uncomfortable with suffering.
Yeah.
So if somebody's like, oh, I had a hard week, we just kind of gloss over it and move on to the next topic.
Right. And that's breaking the connection, really. Because
right.
we're not meeting the person there. We're trying to cheer them up or distract them from, their pain or whatever. A lot of media, that's what their self-stated purpose is, to distract you from your busy life and to just give you a break. Mm-hmm. But we don't want our friendships to be like that.
Right. Well, it feels bad. It feels very demeaning to be like, oh, this doesn't even matter to you enough to sit and listen to me say this is how it went.
Mm-hmm. Well, and they're probably really uncomfortable with it, and so,
right.
But that is what it feels like.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think too, because it's such a unique experience. All of us have unique experiences. So when I say that I have a headache, it's totally different than your experience of a headache.
Yeah.
And we can either choose to focus on well, my headache's different than your headache in this way. And that actually can be a connection experience because we can talk and...
Each you're acknowledging
Right, and understand more about the other person. Or it can be an isolating experience if I'm like, well, your headache's not like mine, so we're not going to talk
and
about
that
it.
always surprises me because, I mean, I don't know. I can't imagine. I've never had a migraine, or I don't think. I've had bad headaches, but I can't imagine that that's a migraine. And knowing people that experience even more pain than that, it's like, dang.
Yeah. But those things can also be an instant connection to people. I mean, because most everyone has had a headache, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So you can instantly connect with people. I actually had this experience just this week. I was at Walmart and I was stuck in line for like ever. I ended up having to wait for a manager to come, and I was in the customer service area. And the woman behind the counter and I ended up talking about how much we hate how cold it is around here.
Yeah.
And it was a fun conversation, just talking about places that are warmer and, you know, kind of the experience of having lived somewhere warmer before moving to Southern Illinois.
Yeah.
And then being like, oh, this place is so cold and so hot at the same time.
Yeah.
You know?
And so there's some camaraderie there. There wasn't a like,
Right.
oh, you don't know cold. Like, because people, I have this vivid experience of that kind of happening. It was in grade school, and maybe we just recently moved here or something, but either I was complaining about the hot or the cold, and this other student was just like, you don't even know. Like, it was just a total throwaway your experience and your comment, because I know that like really cold is worse than, I don't even know what it was, but it was just, it's that kind of, that attitude stuck with me though. It was just the like, you don't even know what you're talking about. It gets way hotter or way colder, whatever it was, than it is today. And I'm like, okay, I'm sure it does, but I mean, can't we be uncomfortable now in whatever temperature it is?
Yeah, well, that's like instant disconnection.
Yeah.
But yeah, what I experienced, we just connected over it.
Yeah, that's funny.
It was fun.
Yeah.
But, you know, suffering can be like that. Some of my best friends are the people that have either health issues or trauma issues, and we've just connected so deeply over those things because there are things that affect pretty much every day of my life. And so being able to be like, oh, yeah, this thing.
You said earlier we have a choice to either kind of do that, right? To isolate or connect. What are some ways we can go out of our way and make sure we're connecting?
Well, I think one is not to do what your person did.
To just totally throw away
the other person's experience. I mean, even if you've had a different experience, like...
I know, it's so silly even to be like, I've been way colder. Okay, dude.
But, I mean, we do that. We kind of were laughing at the people in Florida that were putting on
We were.
heavy jackets when it was like, I don't know, 71.
Yeah.
It was pretty funny.
And it's just what you're used to and what your
Right,
experience is.
exactly.
But if we actually have a conversation with them,
We wouldn't be like, ha.
is making fun of them behind their back any better than...
But it is totally what you're used to. I mean, I'm sure people that live in like Alaska or something would come down here and be like, what are you guys complaining about?
Right. And so I guess, similar to with suffering. I mean, having kids is a good way to practice empathy, because your kid gets a little tiny scrape and it's like, seriously, it's not the end of the world, but inside you might be saying that. And so, but outside you have to be like, oh boy, let's get that fixed up. I'm sure that's painful,
Right.
You don't have to go down into it with them, but you also don't like tell them to shut up, rub some dirt in it.
Right. I think too, when you're suffering, you have to do the work of reaching out.
Yeah.
Which is really hard to do because you're already suffering,
And
so you're like,
and part of it's a risk to reach out because you could get denied and
Right.
then you could be hurting even more. But I think it's worth it. I don't know if this would help us. I had two little alliterative phrases. We can either suffer in silence or we could heal with help. And yeah. But, we got to put ourselves out there, like you said. But we do, we could all too easily let our pain close us up with God or with people.
Right, yeah, we have to do the work of reaching out with both God and people and being like, Lord, this is hard. I don't like this.
Yeah.
Here's why.
And then we can get engaged in either a positive or a negative feedback loop. The isolation, more suffering, more isolation, more suffering feedback loop, or the synergy loop of reaching out, getting help, becoming stronger, becoming more connected, actually, building relationships based on, really deep, important, life stuff.
Right.
But it's not always just connecting over your favorite sports team.
Or whether it's cold outside.
Yeah. Yeah, the weather.
I think we have to, too, have a little bit of perseverance in that.
Oh, sure.
I mean, it's too easy to try with one person and then get rejected.
Yeah.
And then maybe try, maybe your limits are to try with 5 people. And then you're like, forget it. Or 10 people or
we're gonna have to go beyond our limits because people are going to let us down. I mean, I think, again, we look to Jesus. I think he was real and vulnerable with everybody, and he got beat up a lot by people like the Pharisees, and he got misunderstood by his own disciples, and yet he was his genuine self.
Yeah.
And he suffered for it. But he also had his ultimate connection with God to maintain his identity. He didn't get strung out.
People.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, too, that brings up a good point of being honest. Like, part of reaching out is really hard for me to, somebody says how you're doing, and I'm having, like, if I'm having a bad day, it's hard for me to say, I'm having a bad day. I'm more apt to say, oh, I'm doing all right.
How do you answer it the other way then?
It's hard to tell because sometimes people are like, dang, that's way
they don't
more
really
than I
want to
wanted
know.
to hear. Yeah. So
I did. Someone at church, this woman, I was like, hey, how's it going? And she actually was just like, actually, it was a really difficult week. And we didn't have a lot of time, but a few minutes to talk about why. And it's like, oh, that was actually a connection there.
Yeah.
And that was a pretty simple way to because then I could have either just said, I'll pray for you. And if we didn't really have time, because at church, you never know how much time you're going to have to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
But we still could have sort of connected. And she put herself out there. That's the thing. It takes more time, doesn't it, to live like this. It seems tedious sometimes. It doesn't always work. So it's kind of like, is it going to work? And I want to know for sure before I give it a shot.
Yeah, you kind of just have to try it. And then if people are like, oh, that's nice, moving on. And you'd be like, okay, well.
You're still doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I think redefining success as being vulnerable because that's who you want to be, not based on how other people are responding.
And
is so key.
Yeah, because it's good for you. And it's also good for everybody else. Even if
they don't respond well.
Brush it off. It's actually the kind of interactions we are going for.
All right. We love you guys and we're praying for you. Hopefully that encouraged all of us to be a little more intentional about how we handle suffering. Because if we don't choose, our default is to get hard and miserable and disconnected.
We can think of some people like that, and it's really sad. And it gets
really
harder
sad.
to come back. I mean, it's always possible to come back from that.
Right.
God can do an amazing
But the more
work.
steps you take away, the more steps you got to take back.
And they're hard steps.
Come back tomorrow, and we're going to keep talking about suffering and talk about being complete in the middle of that.
Yeah, and once we get that done, we won't have to ever talk about suffering again because we'll have kind of solved it.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
We can take a sigh of relief.
Thanks to everybody that's been sharing the show and listening to the show. We really appreciate it. If you have found this podcast, please do continue to share it. And if you haven't signed up for our email list, go ahead and do that because we send out weekly updates of like what's going on, what we did this week, and what we're doing next week, all that jazz.
And you can do that on our webpage, epiceverydaynow.com. We'd love to hear from you.
We'll talk to you guys later. Have an awesome Thursday.
See ya.